I want to segue into the story we have. This is from Fox News. John Oliver, you know him, you love him, says effing let police officers who resist vaccine mandates quit. Oliver argued resistance to vaccine mandates sums up the core issue with American police. I'm sure it does. But we're segueing from the story that ultimately I think, we were talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse riots. We're talking about how the police were standing down in the George Floyd riots. I shouldn't say Kyle Rittenhouse riots. The George Floyd riots that was the Jacob Blake riots. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's so many. I get confused sometimes. And we will soon have the Kyle Rittenhouse riots because his trial soon. But the ultimate result, I think, is going to be cops quitting. And so we have this story, which is really interesting because police are quitting. A bunch of cops, I think NYPD is suing over the vaccine mandate. That's
I believe
right?
so.
NYPD. Chicago, they're instructing the officers to defy the mandate. In Baltimore, they're doing the same thing. The end result, I think, is going to be cops quitting. And here's the funny thing. We've long been saying now, like long as in the past couple of weeks, the left should be cheering for this. They wanted to defund the police, abolish the police. They should be happy, right? Turns out they are. Fox News reports. Last week tonight, host John Oliver took aim at police officers who have yet to get the vaccine, encouraging them to effing quit. Quote, the police are supposed to be keeping the public safe. That is the point of their jobs, yet some don't seem to give much of an ish about that. The liberal host singled out Chicago and New York police departments as falling into that category. CBD officers, he noted, resisted uploading their vaccination statuses to a portal. Over 20 officers are on no pay status for refusing to comply. He also shared a video of a pair of NYPD officers who were seen removing a commuter from the subway while they themselves were unmasked. That video is actually kind of funny. You see it? A guy in a mask yells at the cops to put a mask on, so they kick him out of the subway. That's crazy. Now, I think they are going to be happy. I think the left is effectively getting their abolish the police through this. Or defund them at the very least.
Well, the abolish the police was never really about abolishing the police. It was about a loyalty test. It's making sure that the police that are going to enforce their edicts and their decrees are going to stay there, and the people who are going to question it are, of course, going to be kicked out. And to me, John Oliver just kind of confirmed how much of a loyalty test these vax mandates are, because a lot of the people who are compliant, a lot of the people who are saying, yes, I'll just do whatever you tell me, are the people who have taken the vax. Some of the people who can't take the vax or don't want to take the vax are more people who are not in line with the state, who question the state, who still are waiting for a lot of the data to come in, are people who are usually skeptical of centralized authorities. So this to me is going to shift things in a major dramatic way, as of course there's estimates that major cities could lose 1/3 of their police forces because of these mandates. Now, when you have such a huge loss with crime already going up dramatically in cities, this is a recipe for a disaster, and to me, only propagates a situation where, of course, you're going to have politically divided people more and more in certain areas that may or may not go against each other. But we also have the news that in Florida, the governor there, Ron DeSantis, is offering police officers $5,000 in a signing bonus if they refuse to take the vaccine and relocate to Florida and decide to be police officers there. Indiana as well, yeah. $5,000.
Indiana,
I don't know the number, but there's a push.
There's an Indiana police department that said that they're going to welcome all the Chicago police officers, whichever police officers do not want to take the vaccine. There's also a Chicago police union president that has been censored. He can't speak about the vaccine and what's going on right now. But before he was censored by a court, he was making some pretty good points about how a lot of these policies are discriminatory, how a lot of his officers can't take the vaccine, don't want to take the vaccine, have natural herd immunity. He was making some really good legitimate arguments. But this is a major issue, and this mandate really will be the true loyalty test that will separate this nation into very, very far away political spectrums that hopefully are able to stay together away from each other peacefully.
There's a lot of reasons.
Most likely not.
There's a lot of reasons why I thought we should get away from the city. We were originally in the Philadelphia area. We're in the Jersey side. And we almost bought a building out there, but sale kind of fell through and it was just, COVID hit. And then I thought, you know what? We need space. We need space. We need cheap space, and we shouldn't be in New Jersey for a variety of reasons. And one of those was that as much as the cops we had were actually really good. We had a small department with a handful of guys who were quick. They were good people. I talked to them. I would go into the police station and talk to them, and they were great. Moderate individuals, not crazy Trumpers, but certainly not authoritarian. And I just kind of thought, as things get crazy and they issue these lockdown orders, And just north of where we lived was the Atlas Gym, where the cops actually came and arrested a guy, I guess.
Ian Smith, right?
Ian Smith, yeah, he's the guy who runs the gym. And the first cops who came there were like, we're not going to enforce this, have a nice day. So they pulled cops from out of town. And I was like, if they can do that, staying in this place is a really, really bad idea, because the cops aren't going to protect you. They're going to oppress you. They're going to tell you that by decree, you can't leave your home, you can't go to the store, you can't do these things, but they're not going to be there when you need them. And so I thought, you know what? I would rather be somewhere with no cops. So where we are right now, if you call the cops, they might be here in, I don't know, half an hour longer. And where I live, good luck. It's a mountain. And so, like my actual house. And as much as there's still risks there, because then everything's on you, one thing I noticed is that a lot of people have said people are actually reluctant to go up into a mountain full of right-wing nut jobs and commit crimes because everyone there is armed to the teeth. Not that anybody actually ever shoots anybody. They don't. But people knowing that cops aren't going to come, they don't climb a mountain and then try to rob mountain folk. In the cities.
People got a lot of guns in the cities too, though.
Yeah, but not
Usually the criminal class.
But look. In New Jersey, where I was told explicitly by the police, by multiple departments, that if someone breaks into my house with a gun and fires at me, I have an obligation to flee my own home.
Yep.
I'm like, we had someone try to break in. And I'm like, what do I do? The one cop goes, I'd answer the door with a shotgun. And so I looked it up and I talked to them. They're like, oh, but if you use it, you'll go to prison.
Yep.
What they said was, it's a semi-castle doctrine state. What that means is you have an affirmative defense to shoot someone who enters your home, but you will be arrested and charged first. Then, after you spend a night in jail and try and get bailed out, which you might not, you can tell the judge why you were justified in shooting the man who was trying to kill you, your friends, and your family. And so I'm like, I'm going to have to argue in court that I don't want to jump from we didn't have a back door. The first floor went over a balcony because it was on a hill. And I'm like, so I got to jump off a 20 feet up, slide down a beam on my deck, or defend myself with a fire. I'm getting out of this state. This is insane. Yeah. West Virginia doesn't have those problems, my friend.
Look, that's good. West Virginia has a lot of problems, but does not have a crime problem.
It has a drug problem.
It's a drug problem. That's a remarkable
It has a
fact,
big pharma it's not a drug problem. It's a
You're
big
right.
pharma problem
It's
that made it a drug problem.
It's a drug problem.
Huh?
It's a drug problem.
Yeah, it's a drug problem that was exacerbated by big pharma.
No.
Yes, I agree.
We can talk about this. We don't talk about this.
We could debate this later on the after show, but we could agree to disagree. It's okay.
Sure. West Virginia does, but look, most crime in America, not all crime, most crime in America, increasingly most crime in America is concentrated in cities. That's because 80% of people live in metropolitan areas. Right. So you don't get a lot of crime in rural West Virginia because nobody lives in rural West Virginia. Nobody's come out and try to shoot you. But I think we had to situate the conversation in terms of like, we saw the largest single year percentage-wise in absolute terms increase in homicide on record last year. Aggravated assaults rose 11%. Grand Theft Auto rose 11% nationwide. It was much worse in individual cities. There are cities in America, Baltimore, Chicago, where the homicide rate, particularly the homicide rate for young black men, exceeds 100 per 100,000. That's an enormous. The nationwide figure is like 6. That's an enormously high rate. So that's crime. Crime is a real and increasing problem in the United States. By comparison to the rest of the world, crime is an intolerable problem in the United States. 20,000 people die a year of homicide. Compare that rate to any other developed nation. It's inconceivable. That's thing one. Thing two is that we know.
We got a culture problem.
Well, we have a whole host of problems, but from the root causes don't matter. What matters is what solves the problem. And the answer is we got a lot of really high quality evidence that police are an effective tool for reducing crime. That if you put cops in an area, crime declines in that area. That if you increase police forces, crime goes down. We're not talking about just like minor crimes. We're talking about homicide.
But let's think about those budgets for a second. I mean, I've been to some countries where they have they don't have armed cops. Like South America has the Garda. And they got a lot of crime for sure in a lot of areas. But you know what? Maybe you look at Scandinavia, and they're an example of how countries are just very different. The left likes to use them as an example of how proper policing can be done, but then you're like, but they're small and they're different. In the United States, we do have a lot of cops. We do have massive police budgets.
We actually. So first of all, we don't have massive police budget. We spend about 3% of all dollars go to cops. It's of all government spending across local, state, and federal. It's like
what's a comparable country with?
But the second point is we also spend a huge amount of money on cops. The second point is like. Compared to OECD countries, cops per capita, we're like in the middle. Like we've way more prisoners per capita. Our prison capacity is enormous. Our cops are like middling. We absolutely there's high quality estimates. There's a guy named Aaron Chalfin at Penn and another fellow whose name is escaping me who do estimates of the returns to policing. And their argument is that American cities are systematically under-policed. For the simple reason that like the amount of money that we spend versus the amount of money that we could save in real value if fewer people were murdered, if there were fewer thefts, if there were fewer assaults, the benefits that we leave on the table dramatically outweigh the amount of money that we're spending now.
Well, there's also another aspect to entertain here, and that's a lot of the blue flu going around, a lot of police officers refusing to do their job. There's also the fact that the NYPD has, almost the same amount of members as many militaries around the world, almost comparable to some of the top militaries out there. They have a whole NYPD intelligence unit that literally has spies all over the world. I would say that them spending $5 billion is a lot of money for policing that many times they decide not to do and participate or even enforce.
The NYPD, militaries and police forces are apples to oranges. The number of things police forces have to do are much larger than some of the things police forces have to do. B, the New York City is a dramatic success story in terms of public safety. If you look at violent crimes decline since the 1990s, it's fallen dramatically across the United States, across major cities, homicide, crimes of violence, etc. The decrease in New York City is 50% larger than other cities. Frank Zimmering, who's a criminologist at UC Berkeley, looks at all the relevant values. He has a book on this called The City That Became Safe. And his argument is that the root explanation is basically like there was a transition to more policing and more and better policing in New York City in the 90s. Like the NYPD, there are certainly... it is an enormous department. They spend a lot of time and a lot of money on a lot of different things. But it's hard to argue with the results in terms of crime reduction. New York City, in homicide rate terms, for example, looks so much better than comparable cities in the United States. It's insane.
How do you compare what happened within the last few months and last year when crime and violence has gone up so dramatically?
Yeah, but
how do you explain it? I mean, that's
yeah.
just for, I'm just asking you legitimately, not trying to counter you.
No, sure. I mean, so the last year's trends are, I think, alarming, and it's unclear, and there's a live debate about what caused the increase. Is it COVID and there's lockdowns? I think that there's some argument there, but I find it ultimately uncompelling for reasons I can enumerate. I do think ultimately, if you look at the timing of when the increases happen, if you look at where they happen, it comes down to a and this goes back to the conversation, a concerted national effort to delegitimize policing and to delegitimize the police. Like, if you agree with the claim that cops reduce crime, that cop presence reduces crime, and then you start punishing cops for showing up, you start saying it's not cool to be a cop, it's we hate the cops, we want to defund the police, cops are racist pigs who want to murder us, you're going to lose policing capacity. When you lose policing capacity, crime is going to go up, and that's what we saw happen dramatically last year. I'm not sure that explains. Let me just.
I think there's so many variables that we could add on to this, but
there was also mass decarceration. We are, by best estimates, at like a 10th of the jail population that we were in February of 2020, and that's going to have an impact at the margins. But like. I did some data analysis today. I looked at 911 calls in Seattle because there's a paper looking at 911 calls as evidence that cops lost legitimacy after George Floyd's death. 911 calls went down. And one of the arguments that I make in response to this paper is data that looks at calls for service by cops usually looks at both calls by civilians, like you pick up the phone and call 911. You're like, hey, there's a crime, but also calls by cops to the center that manages dispatch. it's hard to disaggregate this data. The people who are writing this paper didn't disaggregate this data. They assumed it was all civilians. If you look in Seattle, which is where you're able to get really good numbers, you look at calls from cops and you look at calls from civilians. After the week after George Floyd's death, calls from civilians are flat. They remain the same. Calls from cops collapse 80%, 70%.
Wow.
And have persisted consistently. That's a measure of police activity, police proactivity. You can look at employment in big cities. You can look at the NYPD. You can look at the Minneapolis PD, collapsed. You can look at stops and arrests, collapsed. Across metrics in large, not across the country, but in large cities, there's good reason to believe that cops are doing less and less proactive. And you can argue that that's bad. I think it's not great. I would prefer that cops like selflessly kept going out and doing their jobs no matter the incentives. But you should also be willing to say, like, actually, the incentives are pretty bad right now.
To actually be a cop and do the cop's work.
Yeah.
And some elements I definitely agree with you, and I think you did bring up some important points.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.